welcome to Old School Sundays. I'm your host, Odell, and I have a story about Jim Brown for you today. But before we get started, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. There are moments in sports that don't just change the game, they expose the truth behind it. The summer of 1966 was one of those moments. Cleveland was waiting, training camp loomed, but Jim Brown, the face of the NFL and the most dominant force the league had ever seen, wasn't coming back. He was thousands of miles away, standing under movie lights in London, dressed in a soldier's uniform for a film called The Dirty Dozen. When his owner, Art Modell, demanded he return or face suspension, Brown didn't plead or compromise. He simply said, "Then you can have my uniform." That one line tore through American sports like a thunderclap. In a world where athletes were supposed to obey, Jim Brown didn't just quit, he rebelled. And the ripple of that decision would reach far beyond football fields, shaking the foundation of power, race, and respect in America's favorite game. Before Jim Brown defied the NFL, he ruled it. Every Sunday, he ran through men like a storm through tall grass. There was no wasted motion, no celebration, no mercy. By 28, he had shattered records, carried Cleveland to a championship, and became the league's defining symbol of strength. But behind the glory, Brown was never comfortable just being another employee. He didn't smile for cameras or thank owners for opportunities. When reporters tried to frame him as a gentle giant, he looked past them. When executives reminded him who signed the checks, he reminded them who sold the tickets. To fans, he was a hero. To defenders, a nightmare. But to the establishment, he was a problem. A proud, educated black man who refused to play humble for their comfort. Brown represented a new kind of athlete, one who saw himself as a man first and a player second. He carried not just the football, but the weight of expectations in a divided country. By 1964, he wasn't just a star, he was the NFL itself. Every broadcast, every magazine cover revolved around number 32. The league needed him more than he needed the league, and everyone knew it. The truth terrified them, because power like that, in the wrong hands, could turn the game upside down. 2 years later, that fear became reality. While Brown filmed overseas, Modell called a press conference. He announced that his star player had responsibilities and would be fined or suspended if he didn't return to camp on time. It was a challenge meant to put Brown in his place. Instead, it exposed how little control Modell actually had. From London, Brown released a short statement to reporters back home. "I am retiring from football." That was it. No press tour, no emotion, just finality. Modell was blindsided. So was the league. The greatest player alive had just walked away at his peak, not because of injury, but because of pride. The message was unmistakable. He'd rather leave the game than let someone else dictate his worth. Fans were stunned. Sports writers called him arrogant. Owners called him reckless. But in locker rooms across the country, players, especially young black players, understood exactly what he'd done. He'd broke the invisible leash. For decades, the NFL had treated its athletes like property, bound by contracts they couldn't challenge and rules they couldn't question. Jim Brown had exposed it all with a single act of refusal. And in doing so, he became something the league had never seen before: a free man. To grasp the impact of that decision, you have to see the world around it. 1966 wasn't just another year. It was the height of the civil rights era. Cities burned, marchers faced dogs and batons. Muhammad Ali had just refused to fight in Vietnam. America was tearing itself apart. In that chaos, Jim Brown's retirement became more than a career move. It became a statement. He didn't shout in protest or wave banners. He made his stand through silence and independence. He chose self-ownership in a country still deciding whether men like him could truly be free. Weeks after leaving football, Brown hosted one of the most significant meetings in sports history, the Cleveland Summit. In that room sat Muhammad Ali, Bill Russell, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and other black athletes determined to define their own place in America. Brown wasn't just present, he was the anchor. He had lived what they were about to discuss. When reporters later asked why he supported Ali's defiance of the draft, Brown said, "Because a man has the right to decide his own destiny." It was the same conviction that guided his every move. He wasn't just quitting a team, he was rejecting the idea that success required submission. The NFL had never seen a player treat the game as negotiable, but Jim Brown understood something profound. Freedom was worth more than fame. Hollywood saw in Jim Brown what the NFL had tried to control, a presence that couldn't be ignored. Soon, he was starring in major films, breaking barriers as one of the first black leading men in American cinema. He wasn't the sidekick or the background figure, he was the star. In The Dirty Dozen, he played a soldier who faced death on his own terms. In 100 Rifles, he shared an on screen kiss with a white actress, an act that set off outrage across parts of the country. Each role felt like another strike against the boundaries America tried to draw around him. For Brown, the camera became a new field. He didn't need a helmet to make an impact. He once said acting gave him a louder microphone than football ever could. But fame came with friction. Executives and journalists reused the same words that had followed him from Cleveland: arrogant, defiant, angry. To him, those labels meant one thing: power. Because every time they called him difficult, he knew it was only because they couldn't control him. By the early 1970s, Brown had transformed himself into something entirely new: a brand. He mentored younger athletes, invested in business ventures, and spoke openly about racism and accountability. His Ameri Can Foundation helped young men from broken communities rebuild their lives, teaching discipline and pride. But the world didn't quite know what to do with him. Was he a hero or a rebel? An activist or provocateur? The truth was simple: Jim Brown was a man who refused to live on anyone's terms but his own. The NFL, meanwhile, tried to bury his influence. It promoted new stars, aired new highlights, and shifted attention to fresh faces. But no matter how the league evolved, his absence loomed like a shadow across every field. Owners whispered that he'd ruined precedent. Coaches told rookies to stay humble whenever they brought up his name. And sports writers, many of whom had once built their career celebrating him, turned bitter. They called his exit a betrayal, as if walking away from the league were a crime against the game itself. But the players knew better. In locker rooms, his story spread like folklore. To the older veterans, he was proof that there was life after the game. To the younger ones, he was a symbol of resistance. Deacon Jones once said, "Jim Brown didn't quit, he just stopped letting them own him." The league had tried to make an example of him. Instead, he became a blueprint. Every future star who pushed back, whether it was Curt Flood in baseball, Muhammad Ali in boxing, or modern players fighting for their own voices, owed something to the man who left at his peak. Brown had cracked the armor of control. He'd shown that athletes weren't soldiers under command. They were men who could choose their own battles. In the years that followed, the NFL slowly embraced him again. The same league that once viewed him as a threat began to call him the greatest of all time. But even as they honored him, the myth of his defiance never faded. Because what Jim Brown did wasn't just retire, it was reveal. He showed that greatness and obedience didn't have to coexist. He forced a $1 billion league to confront its own dependence on the men it claimed to own. His legacy lives in every contract negotiation, every player who takes a public stand, every athlete who speaks without fear of losing their platform. They are all, in some way, echoes of that summer in 1966. Even in his later years, when age softened his voice, the conviction never left. He spoke about respect, discipline, and unity, but always on his own terms. Reporters still called him complex, controversial, difficult. They were right. He was all those things, because freedom, in its truest form, rarely looks polite. Jim Brown's greatest run didn't end in the end zone. It ended in defiance, walking away while the world begged him to stay. He proved that the truest power a man can have isn't fame or money or even talent. It's the courage to say no. And when he said it, the game changed forever. Because Jim Brown didn't retire from the NFL, he outgrew it.